have 18 siblings, all the same parents, had 19 kids. There was 3 sets of twins in the family, and I'm a twin. My twin is actually still Amish. She never left. I had an eating disorder. Didn't know I had an eating disorder. I would starve myself because I wanted to lose weight and get smaller than my twin. I'm gonna cry about this. I did all kinds of crash diets, all kinds of crazy stuff to try to quickly lose the weight. Dieting and healthy should not be in the same sentence. I always knew in my teenage years that I didn't belong there. And I'm not kidding you, Craig. I literally snapped my fingers and I said, I'm leaving. And then I ended up climbing up onto the roof, at this 15-foot roof, and jumping off that roof to leave.
Lizzie Ens is a board-certified functional nutrition practitioner, personal trainer, author, speaker, podcast and radio host, and global social media celebrity. Her journey from devout Schwarzentrooper Amish member to global influencer is nothing short of remarkable. As the driving force behind Undiet You, an online telehealth coaching business, Lizzie is a pioneer in holistic wellness. As the CEO and co-founder of Miss Commando, a beauty brand committed to non-toxic health-conscious products, Lizzie continues to lead the charge towards a more mindful approach to personal care.
So I grew up in the strictest form of the Amish community. It's called Schwarzentrooper Amish, and a lot of people actually don't know that there is a community this strict, because a lot of the Old Order and New Order Amish that you might see in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, or in the hub of Amish country in Ohio, they're a lot more modernized than where I'm from. So when I talk about my sect specifically, one perfect example is that we didn't have Rumspringa, which, if you don't know what Rumspringa is, it means the kids are allowed to, in their teenage dating years, to kind of go out and experience the world and drive cars and get jobs and, party and do whatever they want for a few years to decide whether or not they want to stay Amish or if they want to leave. But where I'm from, we were not allowed to do that. So when I decided to leave, I had to escape and run away.
Wow. So this is a very strict Amish community, as you were saying.
Absolutely.
And so, like you mentioned, Lancaster, Pennsylvania, which is, I'm from Altoona, PA, but my wife, we live in Chambersburg, and it's a very predominant Amish and Mennonite community. Everywhere you go, we go and we'll go to the Mennonite, we'll get farm fresh goods from them, and it's just very prevalent in this community. But we see them with technology like phones and electricity, and we see them in their horse and buggy with electricity on the back, for the lights. But you grew up in a community where you probably weren't allowed some of these things.
Absolutely not. The buggy that you just described, I always say that's the Mercedes of buggies compared to how I grew up, because we weren't even allowed to have the orange triangles on our buggy, which I think it's necessary. Just from a safety perspective, I think that that's necessary, but their church just, doesn't allow that. And then just to give you a little bit of an idea of how much more strict we were, we didn't have any kind of indoor plumbing. We didn't have, running water in our house. So we had outhouses, to go to. We had to go there to go to the bathroom or restroom. I call it a restroom, not a bathroom, because you can't take a bath in it.
Right.
Then we had to heat up our own water. We had, it's completely different than what you just described in terms of technology. The Old Order and New Order have become very, very advanced. They're riding around in their electric bikes and scooters, and they take drivers everywhere. And some of them even they got rid of their horse and buggies because they just scooter and bike everywhere, or they use their tractors and then they take drivers. Well, we weren't allowed any of that. So where I'm from, they're kind of stuck in the 1800s, and they just kind of hang out there. Right around the time the steam engines came around, they said, nope, this is getting too fancy, we're getting too modern, we're going to step away from that. And that's what they did. But the one thing that they have done really well is they've become really self-sufficient. They don't rely on the government for anything. Are there a lot of things that I don't agree with? Yeah, absolutely. That's why I left. But it's been 20 years since I left, and it took me years to get to this place of really respecting and honoring where I'm from because of what it taught me. And I believe that my purpose and my mission is to educate people on the good things that they have the foundations that they have and what they teach. And I believe that the modern world can learn a lot from them.
From my perspective, it looks like we could learn so much from how they're living their lives in terms of it's a very simple way of life. I mean, they don't have a lot of the stuff that we have in the modern world, but I think from my perspective, it seems like it's a more the beautiful kind of way of life that just keeps life simple. And there's a few things that I'm sure we could learn from them that makes our lives healthier, easier, more stress-free, and relaxing in a lot of ways. And so you said you ran away from that community. How old were you when you did that?
So I was 19 years old. And just to give a little backstory of my families, I have 18 siblings. So my parents, all the same parents, had 19 kids. And there was 3 sets of twins in the family, and I'm a twin. So my twin is actually still Amish. She never left, and she has 11 kids now. Yeah. So I always knew in my teenage years that I didn't belong there anymore, and there was a lot of questions that I had that I couldn't get answers to. And long story short, I became a member of the church, which means I got baptized into the church. And that's kind of expected between the ages of 18 to 20. Like, they sort of expect you to get baptized into the church. That's because you can't get married unless you're a member of the church. But that also means that the church has a lot more control over you. And there is a hierarchy between the men and the women. The men kind of make the rules, and the women are supposed to just sort of follow along and obey and listen and have babies and take care of the house. So there's a lot of those things as well. And there were a lot of reasons why I couldn't stay, because I couldn't agree with that. I couldn't agree with the beliefs and the religious beliefs that they had and that they taught. I couldn't believe in the God that they were teaching me who he was. To them, and this isn't true for everybody, but when I was there, the way that they taught who God was is that he's like up in the sky waiting to beat you over the head if you do something wrong. And it wasn't loving at all. And I just couldn't get on board with that. So I left when I was 19.
19. Wow. That had to have been, I mean, that's a very, 19, that's a very vulnerable time in your life. I mean, you grew up born and raised Amish, and then at 19 to just say, I'm up and leaving. I mean, did your family and friends, did they know you were leaving, or did you just get up and walk away at one point?
No, they definitely did not know that I was leaving. At the time, I was dating a guy from New York, and I lived in Ohio. Yeah. And the way that we communicated was through writing letters, because we didn't have phones. So we sort of like became pen pals, and we had been dating for about a year and a half. And we could only write letters to each other every other week. So every other week I would write him a letter, and then so we would swap. And at this point in time, him and I had never talked about leaving, ever. And at the time that I ended up leaving, it was a few months leading up to it. I knew something big was changing. I knew something was happening. I just didn't know what it was. But that feeling when you know that something in your gut and something in your spirit is telling you that there's a big shift coming, even though you don't know what it is. That's the feeling that I had. At the same time, I was also very convicted, because I had the conviction of the church and feeling like if I leave, I'm doing everything wrong, and I'm a terrible person, even though it was where I knew I was supposed to go. So fast forward, I'm working at my oldest sister's house at the time as a hired maid, and it's my turn to go deliver a letter to my boyfriend. And so I walk up the hill, and I opened the mailbox to put my letter in the mailbox. And when I opened the mailbox, there was a note in there without an address, but it had my name, and I knew it was my boyfriend's handwriting. And I was like, how, he's in New York, like how the heck did he get this note in this mailbox? So I rip open the note, and it said, my sister and her boyfriend and we ran away from the Amish yesterday. And again, we had never talked about this. Didn't even know it was on his mind. And we drove down from New York yesterday, and if you want to leave, we'll come by tonight at 10 p.m. and we'll pick you up. And I'm not kidding you, Craig. Like, I literally like snapped my fingers and I said, I'm leaving.
Just
Didn't
like
even
that.
think. Just like that. Because I was already like ready. I just didn't know how I was going to do it. So that was noon. And I had until evening to figure out how I'm going to leave because I can't tell anybody. I debated telling a sister of mine that was visiting that day to just kind of like say, hey, I may not see you for a very long time, but I knew that I couldn't because if somebody finds out that I'm planning on leaving, there's definitely going to be an intervention. So I
Yeah.
didn't tell anybody.
And so I can only imagine one of 19 kids. And what child are you? Are you the youngest, the oldest, in the middle somewhere?
Right in the middle. I was number 9.
Number right in the middle. And
Yeah.
so I can only imagine putting myself in your shoes and deciding maybe how hard that might have been. I mean, you said it was just a snap of a finger. Like you like didn't hesitate. You just went full in. But knowing like you didn't tell anyone, I can only imagine that that could have been challenging in some ways. But then also once you made the decision to leave, I'm curious kind of what that was like in the months to years kind of following that, because you probably didn't have, I mean, any I don't know, documentation that we would
Yeah.
need here in the modern world as far as like a birth certificate or social security or anything like that maybe. So how did you go about transitioning in the months to years after?
Yeah, so just to give the listeners a little bit of insight, I did end up waiting until that night. And the way that I ended up leaving is I waited until my sister and her family like went to bed, and I was on the third floor. So when I got upstairs, I pretended like I was going to bed, but I wrote a note for my mom instead, and I told her that I'm leaving, and I made it very clear that it has nothing to do with her or anybody there, that I just had to go. And then I ended up climbing up onto the roof at this 15-foot roof and jumping off that roof to leave. But to your point, that whole comprehending, like having to let go of your family. When I was sitting on that roof, I sat on that roof for like 30 minutes contemplating how I was going to jump off the roof without breaking a bone. But also the whole time I'm thinking about my twin sister. I knew she was getting married 6 months later. And I knew that if I jumped off that roof at that point in time, I will not be at her wedding. So for a split second, I thought to myself, if I just wait 6 more months, I can be at her wedding. But I also knew that if I did that, I would never leave.
Yeah.
So this was my only chance to make it happen. So I did obviously end up jumping off that roof, and I did not break a bone, and then I ran away from there. But to continue on like documentation and what I had. So we did not have a social security number. The only documentation that I had was well, I didn't have it with me. I had to go to the health department and pay $25 for my birth certificate because I had no idea where my mom was keeping my birth certificate. And so I had to go apply for a social security number. And there was 3 forms of identification that I needed, and that was a birth certificate, and then I had to go find the doctor that was my mom's doctor when I was born because it was the only medical record I had. And I had to call in, make an appointment to go in, and then get my medical record for when I was born.
Wow.
And then the last thing that I needed my 8th grade education card, and I didn't have it with me. So I had to wait for a Sunday that I knew that my entire family was going to be at church. And I had to go home and get some of my belongings. And that's when I got my 8th grade education card. So those were the things that I had to get. And I had $20 in my pocket when I left. That was it. I didn't have anything else.
I mean, that's an incredible story, and to know that, I mean, you've been gone 20 years now, you said, right? 20 years. So I mean, the first half of your life you were raised in the Amish community, and now pretty much the second half of your life you've been here in the modern world. So you really have this unique perspective of seeing what that was like on both ends. You know, people, I mean, there's a lot of people struggling with their health, and that should be as no surprise. I mean, there's so many people. Obesity affects, you know, almost half the American population now. we're talking autoimmune disorders, thyroid problems, digestive issue. The list goes on, and chronic long-term diseases, heart disease, Alzheimer's.
Yep.
And I don't know any statistics, but when you grew up in the Amish community, was there anything like that going on? Was there any major health problems there with them? And I mean, now it's running rampant with our community, and I'm curious, one, if there was anything like that going on with the Amish community, and two, what do you think maybe is kind of contributing to our poor health, and what's kind of keeping maybe the Amish community healthier?
So they do have some of their own, diseases. They have heart disease. There's diabetes. There's cancer. They have those issues within the community. What I will say that there is a lower number of is people with ADHD, ADD, autism. Like, I had never heard of those terms until I left. And it's not super, super common. Like I said, they do have other health issues that they have to deal with, but it's a little bit different. And I believe that our convenience of modern Amazon priming everything, like the quickness of everything, I believe that convenience is killing us in many ways because it makes us more sedentary. I mean, just to give you an example, I went to Walmart one time and I saw these and I had my 5-year-old with me, and I saw these lines of cars lined up that literally just open up their trunk, and these employees are just loading up their groceries into their vehicle. And I stopped my kiddo and I said, listen, we will not get so lazy. I'm sorry to call people out, but the truth is that we have gotten so lazy, we can't even go shop for our own food.
Yeah.
And that is what I'm talking about, is that convenience is killing us because it makes us more sedentary, and that's not helping our obesity epidemic. And we both know activity is what keeps us going. Like, we have to be active. And so the thing about the Amish is that even though they may have some of these diseases and things going on, it's not as rampant. Absolutely not. And they are very, very self-sufficient. So they grow their own fruits and vegetables. At least where I'm from, they do. I can't speak for other Amish communities. Maybe they don't do as much of that, because I do know that the old order and the new order, they may shop more at, the modern grocery stores than what we did. But we grew all of our own animals. We grew all of our own gardens. And when I go back there and I see my mom, they're still doing that. And it always reminds me how important that is. And they're very, very self-sufficient, and they're sustainable. And they're not relying on the government to pull them through on anything. It's like, we are going to figure it out. And I had someone ask me a few years ago, what are the 3 things? Like, what are some things that makes them successful? And I actually believe a lot of Amish people are very successful people, and they're very good business people. And part of that is the structure and the discipline that they built without even knowing that they're building it. So for an example, like, we got up every morning around the same time, and we would go milk the cows. And then we'd all go in at the same time to eat breakfast together. And then we would go about our day. That's structure, and it's also discipline. And there was no Netflixing it today because we don't feel like doing something. No, it was like, no, you got to do it. You just get it done, and we figure it out. And they're very, very creative in how they do things. So that's part of what makes them so self-sufficient, and they're very disciplined as well.
Yeah. I mean, I grew up the complete opposite. I was on my, video games and just doing, as a kid, like, that's, eating fast food. And if I weren't cognizant enough to kind of remove myself from that and just kind of learn a little bit more about healthy living, I would be on the fast track to where a lot of my friends and family are, and people never come to that realization. But you made it a point to say that the Amish community is very self-reliant, self-disciplined. Even the kids growing up, you're up at a certain time every day. And my first kind of introduction to, growing up here in central Pennsylvania, I was always kind of surrounded by the Amish community and Mennonites. And that was just a part of my life, just kind of interacting with them. My aunt, actually, funny enough, she converted to being a Mennonite when she was probably in her early 20s.
What?
Yeah, so that was, I guess, my first interaction, because I was 10 or 12, and she, I don't know what sparked this. I'll have to talk to her, but in her early 20s, she got married, and they moved from Pennsylvania to Vermont and just started living a very simple way of life. And I remember going up there and visiting her when I was 10 or 12, and their life was very different, of course. I mean, they had electricity, but no, it was just very simple living. I mean, her husband became a carpenter. They made their own food, and that was my first introduction. I'm coming from fast food. I'm coming from,
Yeah.
modern America, and that was my first introduction. And she handed me this, I'll never forget this, a glass of raw goat's milk. And I thought this was the grossest thing in the world. I was like, she just went out there and milked that goat, and now I'm drinking this. Like, it was different than the milk that I get on the grocery store shelf, right? And I didn't have an appreciation for it then when I was 10 or 12, but I got that example of what that was like, and I'm so grateful for that experience now to see that. She's no longer Mennonite. She joined the army and she went about her life, but that was an amazing opportunity because I stayed with her for a week, and then as I evolved and I grew older into college, I started going to farmers markets, and I went to Penn State, and there's awesome farmers markets there. And of course, the Amish have the most incredible stands. And the one thing that stood out to me was a lot of the times, every Saturday I would go, and a lot of the time it was just the kids working the stands. The parents weren't even around. There were these 10-year-old kids, and they were so disciplined, they were so personable, and they knew how to run the business at 10 years old. And that was another like momentum shift for me, thinking this is incredible. And I think back to my 9 or 10-year-old self, and I was eating chips and playing video games, and I would not have been able to run a farmer's market stand like they're doing. So that just speaks to the fact. I mean, this is how this community is raised, and that is teaching them so many incredible lessons that we've honestly been doing probably throughout most of human history. But we live in a very weird time right now where we've forgotten where we came from. And I think there's a lot that the Amish community can teach us. And that's one reason why I wanted to have you on today, was because you have that very special background, and you can probably help to speak to that and help a lot of people that are listening. Because with Ancestral Supplements, we have what are called the 9 ancestral tenets. And this is sleep, eat, move, shield, connect, cold, sun, fight, and bond. So these are all things that we believe as a company that people need in order to just have good health. That's eat a certain diet, sleep a certain way, move your body a certain way, get a little bit of sun, do all the things that any healthy living thing needs. Yeah. And it sounds like, I mean, coming from the Amish community, they're really just doing most of these things just by how they live their lives.
Yeah.
And because of that, they are living healthier lifestyles. And we don't do that here in, the modern world.
Yeah, no, it's very, very interesting. I remember the first time that I heard about kids getting into college and they didn't even know how to like make themselves food or do their laundry. Like, it blew my mind, because I was like, how is that even possible at that age that you don't know? I started to learn how to work when I was 5. Washing dishes and carrying in wood to help with the wood burning stoves. And I've had people tell me like, oh, Amish just have kids because they, want to use them for labor. I'm like, that's not true. Like, absolutely not. First of all. Second, kids don't want to just sit around and do nothing. Like, their creative minds need to have something that gets them stimulated, and they want to be creative. We just, as parents, have to be willing to put that in front of them and help them. And it's like my kiddo, like, he loves to cook. So I'm going to take the time to let him cook whatever he wants to cook, because he gets to be creative with that. And I think that as parents, it's really, really important that we set that example for them. And the problem with nowadays, especially with, I see this a lot in the industry and the clients that I have and people that I work with, is that now the generation that I'm working with, a lot of them, they haven't learned how to just cook plain simple meals. And I'm not saying like they have to taste boring. You can make them taste really, really good. But just knowing how to even cook a simple meal. It's like I don't know how to do that, but they know how to put things in a microwave. And I learned how to cook from scratch. That's just how we cooked. And I remember when I left, right after I left, it was a very, very interesting experience because when I left, we didn't have electricity. So the first time I walked into a room and I could just like flip on a light switch, I was like, this is amazing. Like, we just like flip the switch and there's a light on. But then I also discovered a microwave and I was like, wow, a microwave? I can just like stick food in a microwave and my dinner's ready and I don't have to cook from scratch. This is amazing too. And then I discovered fast food drive-throughs. And I was like, I can just drive through a drive-through and get my dinner? Awesome. Well, 20 pounds later, I was like, there's something wrong here. Like this isn't the way that it should be. And so after all of that happened, I started to go back to, okay, what do I need to cook? How do I need to cook differently? I didn't want to cook exactly the way that I did growing up, but I needed to teach myself how to cook differently and healthy at the same time. And so I did that.
You just answered about maybe 3 of my next questions, because I was going to ask you if you noticed any health problems after you transitioned to the modern world. And I mean, because you said you had access to microwave and fast food and all these forms of technology, the light switch, all these things that, make life easier, these conveniences. But there's a term, it's coined by Darren O'Lean, but he coined this term fatal conveniences. And basically he calls out all these modern day conveniences, but they come at a cost. And they are slowly killing us. It might be more convenient to drive places. It might be more convenient to do all these things, but it takes away the movement. We've found a way to work out the movement in our lives. We no longer have movement required. We no longer have to grow our food or cook our food. We can just order it on Uber Eats or have people come out and deliver it to us. So it's these conveniences that maybe once in a while, if you make them the exception, are they going to be that problematic? Probably not. But if you make them the rule and you're not cooking your food every day, you're constantly eating out time after time after time and doing all these things that take away our movement and healthy food, then this is going to compound and lead to health problems. And so did that happen for you when you discovered fast food and all these things? Did you just start experiencing like poor health?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, going back to your goat milk experience. So I had the opposite experience when I grew up on, milking cows and drinking raw milk and making butter and all of that stuff. Everything was just raw and didn't even know anything different. When I left, I didn't have that. So I would just get milk at the store and the first time that I had pasteurized milk, I thought it was the most disgusting milk I'd ever tasted in my life. Then I just, sort of got used to it, but never fully. And the years went by, and I discovered that I had a severe dairy sensitivity. Like I could literally I went dairy free for a bit, and I remember if I would have a meal out or something and it had cheese on it, I could have 2 bites of that meal and my nose would just like start dripping. Like that's how severe it was. So I thought that I needed to be dairy free for the rest of my life. I was like, dairy's the problem. And then one day I was like, there's something wrong here because there are lots and lots of benefits to whole raw dairy. Why is this an issue for me? So, because I could go to the store and I could get grass-fed whole milk. Like, it's awesome, whatever. Same problem, instant stomach pain. One day I was like, you know what? I'm going to try raw dairy. And I realized I can get it locally here. So I got some raw dairy and I tested it with just a little bit. And I'm not lying, Craig, like I never had an issue with raw dairy since.
You grew up on raw dairy. Did you consume a lot of it when you were a kid and a teenager?
Every single day.
Yeah, and you didn't have those issues then.
No.
Only when you started introducing even the pasteurized organic
Grass
what,
fed stuff, yeah.
yeah.
Whole meal grass fed stuff, yeah.
And that's a whole conversation that we'll do more videos on, talking about why, pasteurization destroys a lot of the key enzymes and the healthy bacteria in the dairy itself that help you to be able to digest this. And I'm in the same way. I grew up on kind of the opposite. Like, we're meeting here in the
Yeah.
middle. We found our way back to kind of the simple way of living, but you came from that, and then you found out what it was like to live in the modern world, and now you're kind of reintroducing some of those uh, practices that you grew up on. I was the opposite. I, was unhealthy as a kid, but then I've gradually found my way back to these simple practices. And I was the same way. Pasteurized dairy, grew up, acne, digestive issues. But raw milk, I can do 1 to 2 gallons a week with fermented kefir and a farm fresh cheese that's raw. And I can do so much of it and zero issues. And it's an incredible health food. And that's something that I wish people understood, is that, one, how you prepare food makes all the difference in the world. And then, how you raise the animals and that all this goes into healthy food. And that's not something that people see when they go to the grocery store. And that's also one I wanted to ask you was, what do you do now? And do you do a lot of the things that you did then as a teenager growing up? Do you implement a lot of those things in the Amish community? And what can you and can't you get away with modern world food?
Yeah, so people always ask me if I miss like the Amish cooking. I'm like, no, because I don't cook like that anymore, because they do cook pretty heavy. Like there's a lot of like heavy creams and sugars and stuff like that. But my whole philosophy is to keep it simple. So it's not that complicated to cook up some chicken or steak, have some vegetables, and a potato. Like, that's really not that complicated. And back to like cooking, what is always impressive to me is when my clients get to a realization of, oh, when I cook my food at home, I actually feel better. Like when they start knowing what's in their food and they use good oils and they're cooking their food, they're like, wow, I actually feel better. And then their body like has less inflammation. So for me, my company is called Undiet You, and the reason for that is because I actually went through those first few years after leaving, and I had gained those 20 pounds, and I had like a really unhealthy relationship with my body, and I started to jump onto all of these different fad diets to like quickly lose weight. And then eventually I got into personal training and I got certified as a personal trainer. I was like, yes, like this is my dream. Well, it took me 2 months into training on the gym floor to realize that this is a small fraction of the success for people. And so I went back to school and I studied holistic health. And that's when I learned a lot on how to just simply cook basic meals, make them taste delicious, but keeping it simple. And so fast forward a few years, this was when 2020 happened. Everybody like had shifts in 2020. It's like the whole thing. And that was really, I had always known, I had the same feeling as I did a few years before I left the Amish community. I had the same feeling leading up to this moment where I knew that I was supposed to have my own business, but I didn't know how I was going to do it. And then when 2020 happened, the Lord was like, it's time. Like, you need to go out on your own. And I didn't know what I was going to call my business. And I very vividly was driving in the car one day and I'm thinking about the entire thing. And I already planned to do this. And I had been on this mission to teach people how to just eat healthy and not diet. And that, all of a sudden that day, I just remember I was like looking at the sky and all of a sudden God was like, undiet. And I was like, undiet? It's like, yeah, you need to teach people how to not diet and be healthy at the same time. And dieting and healthy should not be in the same sentence, because just dieting doesn't equal healthy. And we've been taught for so long from the dieting industry, the fat dieting industry, that in order to be healthy, we have to diet. No, you just need to know and understand how to fuel and nourish your body that makes you feel good. And it's not a diet, it's a lifestyle.
No, I love that so much. And I'm so happy you mentioned that. That's something that we try and ingrain in people here with ancestral supplements. There's different we call them diets today, and what humans had access to for most of human history was what was locally in season, nutrient
Mm-hmm.
dense, everything. If there was calories in their environment, they were going to eat it because it meant they could fuel their body. They
Mm-hmm.
could reproduce, and they didn't care. They didn't care about a label. They didn't care about keto,
Yeah.
carnivore, vegan, paleo. They didn't care about that. They just ate what was in their local environment because it was going to nourish them. And I'm so happy you mentioned that, because there's so much out there with people, guys and girls, that follow fad diets that really struggle. And then, well, honestly, what I found, and I'm sure you found, is it always comes back to simplicity. Is,
Mm-hmm.
you can try all the different diet modalities, which I've tried many different diets over the years, but I've always come back to simplicity. And I
Mm-hmm.
love the just going to my local farm, getting all the high quality foods that I can get, because how you process a food is kind of what makes it healthy or unhealthy. I can
Mm-hmm.
do all the dairy. I can do grains, especially if they're made a certain way. I can do the well raised meats and homegrown vegetables. I don't follow a particular diet. I just do what's local to me, and that's what makes me feel good. And I'm sure that's the way it is for a lot of other people too. And I hope people hear that, what you're saying, is because that is a way to create a healthy relationship with food, as you found
Yeah.
out, you know,
Yeah.
and that's truly amazing. And so you started your company, Undiet You. This was during 2020 and all the craziness that brought. What was really the catalyst for why you wanted to start in the health and wellness industry? Because you didn't come from that background. I mean, starting that way, but was it because you had poor health yourself, or what was that moment like when you said, I just want to help people?
Yeah. So, ironically, this is something that a lot of people don't know or even think would be a possibility in the Amish community. But when I was a teenager, so I have a twin, like I mentioned earlier, and I was always the bigger one than my twin. I wasn't obese, but I was bigger than she was. And so, because of that, in my teenage years, I got bullied even in the Amish community for being bigger than my twin. So when that happened, that led me to creating a very unhealthy relationship with food. And I had an eating disorder, didn't know I had an eating disorder. I would starve myself. And then, because I wanted to lose weight and get smaller than my twin. So that went on for a few years. But what happened is I actually ended up having a lot of health issues while I was still in the Amish community. Like my mom would send me to this chiropractor that, would try to help me with whatever I was going through. I was iron deficient. And it was primarily just me because I had such an unhealthy relationship with my body due to what was being said to me. And so at the time that I ended up leaving the community, I didn't have that going on. But as we know, if you don't fully heal from something, it's going to come back, and it may come back with vengeance. So when I gained the 20 pounds after I had left, that came back. And that's when I went into fat dieting. I did all kinds of crash diets, all kinds of crazy stuff to try to like quickly lose the weight. And at some point, when I was still living in Ohio, I got into running, and I started my activity lifestyle in marathon running, and I loved it. And that was the kickstart of me into the active lifestyle. What does that look like? And it's funny because now when I look back, I remember when I was still a teenage Amish girl that I always wanted to go for walks and runs, and we weren't allowed to do that. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, we weren't allowed to do it, and I would see people in the community that would just go for walks or they'd go for a run, and I'm like, oh, I want to do that, but we weren't like allowed to do that. It wasn't that I wasn't active; I just felt like it was something that I wanted to do. So I got into marathon running, and after I completed that, I realized that I wanted to be a trainer. I wanted to get into the training industry. So long story short, I got into training, and then that's when I got into the holistic health. So I feel like over all of those years, I was always just evolving. I was always just seeking to learn more, because and after I started my Undiet You business in 2020, the year after that, I wanted to get more into hormones. I wanted to get into understanding the thyroid and the hormones in the gut, because I got diagnosed with hypothyroidism, Hashimoto's. And so that diagnosis and going through that and wanting to understand that more is what led me into the functional field. And I went back to school and studied functional health and got board certified as a functional practitioner.
And is that a main focus of yours, is helping men and women with not just, I mean, thyroid issues
Yeah,
mostly?
so I do hormones, thyroid, so to kind of like lay out a picture of what this looks like in the clientele that comes to me, is usually people that have gone to the doctor and they've tried to get help and they're not getting anywhere. They're not running the labs that they need to run to know what is truly going on. I have this one patient right now that for years and years and years tried to get help from her doctors and she wouldn't get anywhere. She came to me, and within weeks her symptoms started to, like, just in the first week or two from just changing a few things. We hadn't even seen her labs yet. Her symptoms started to improve. And it was literally just going back to the basics and the foundation of what are you putting into your body? What do we need to adjust? And here's the kicker. If you have never been educated on that foundation, you don't know. So you believe that the lean cuisine is healthy for you. But if you don't have if someone comes in and then gives you the education and says, actually, let's just cook some food. Lean cuisine is, full of preservatives and sodium that's making you sicker and causing inflammation. Let's go over here and have you cook your own food. Within days, they're going to start feeling better. Mm-hmm. So I teach my clients that it's my job to educate them so that they can feel self-sufficient and educated to go advocate for themselves.
Yeah, no, I love that. You have clients, patients that come to you, and I'm sure, I mean, every individual is unique with what they need specifically in regards to food and lifestyle. What are some common, like maybe 3 or 4 common things that impact people negatively in terms of maybe diet or light or just lifestyle? What are things that you see that are really negatively impacting people? If they could just change those few things, what would those be?
Oh my gosh. Number one is not getting enough sleep. I cannot stress this enough. I have, so many people that I see and help with their sleep. And once they start getting enough sleep and getting better quality sleep, it literally changes their life. I've had people that started working with me, and within a few weeks, they were sleeping all night, and they wake up and they're like, wow, I don't even need my caffeine. Like, I'm good to go. And they're like, I haven't felt this good and slept this good in 15 years. And so sleep is where your body will rest, digest, and heal. It's when these specific hormones go into your brain to clean out your brain and let your body heal. Like, it's so incredibly important. So that's one. Number 2 is hydration. The amount of people that are dehydrated the percentage is exceptionally high. And when you have one of the top indicators of dehydration is if your red blood cell count is high, the chances of you being dehydrated is pretty high. So if you're not hydrating, your body's not detoxing properly. And because when you hydrate, it flushes your system. It helps flush your liver, helps flush your kidneys, helps you detox. And if you're not hydrating with enough water, and some people need some additional because there's hydrating on a cellular level. So you could be drinking a gallon of water a day and still be dehydrated if you're not hydrating on a cellular level. Put a little bit of sea salt in your water, you're probably going to feel better. So hydration is incredibly key. And then just keeping it simple with the food, like so incredibly simple. I always tell people, I'm like, it's not that complicated. You just you look at what your protein is, you look at what your healthy fats are, you look at what your complex carbs are that you're having. Just keep it so simple and you are good to go. And I'm not kidding. Like, when people follow through with that, It's amazing what happens.
Yeah. I'm so happy you mentioned those three in particular. Like, I hope people are hearing what you're saying, Lizzie, because sleep is like the number one thing. I think people think like the food, which is incredible, but sleep, you made it a point to say sleep first and foremost. I know in my life, that was the first thing that I changed that made the biggest difference.
Mhm.
You know, I put my phone in the kitchen overnight. I don't keep it by my
Yep.
bedside. I make sure my room is dark. I keep it nice and cool. Like all those little things make a
Mhm.
huge difference, especially the screens before bedtime.
Yep.
What you're saying, this is, if people can hear that and just implement that, it might be hard at first, leaving your comfort zone. But the pain, I've always said the pain of staying in your comfort zone is going to be greater than just that little bit of pain that it takes to leave your comfort zone, just that one or two times. And then the water piece, I mean, people often overlook just the power of simplicity, the water and the food. I mean, go back and ask those simple questions like, what's local in my environment? How can I source my own food? Is there a farm near me? Things like that, because the lean cuisine you're talking about, I mean, you're mentioning like we grew up in this environment and that's all we know.
Yeah.
And we were never given a rule book. Whereas I feel like if you know, we're born and we're able to make our own food and hunt or grow or, you know, get a little bit more connected to nature, I feel like we have maybe a little bit more of that rule book kind of built into us, that manual, that user manual. But I feel like for a majority of us here, the 300 million Americans, like we aren't born with a user manual that shows us all these things, you know?
Well, yeah, and it goes back to like convenience. I always say like convenience kills. What it also does is it really messes with the expectations that people have. So because everything is so convenient, we can order our food in, we can microwave our food, we can Amazon Prime things in. I always tell people you can't Amazon Prime your body, even though you want to. But because of all these conveniences that are readily available for us, it really, really messes with the mindset and the expectation of what is going to happen when someone decides to go on a health journey and the transformation. Now, you can do a lot in a short period of time, but the expectation of that long term result is like, well, I want to lose 50 pounds in 12 weeks. Yeah, is that really reasonable? Is your expectation a little, high to what it should be? I'm not saying it's not possible, but everybody that comes to me, most of them, their first priority is not weight loss. That is part of the goal, but their first priority is I want to feel better and I want to understand how to fuel and nourish my body in order to do so. And when that becomes your first priority, the weight loss is just a byproduct. Now, what I will say though is you have to decide that this is what you want. But what you do after that decision is what matters the most. So you can say, I have decided that I want to be healthy. But that decision has to be followed with an action. And that action is your responsibility. Now, you may be like, well, I don't know how to do it. I'm going to go hire someone to help me with it. There is nothing wrong with that. I hire people for myself all the time. I have my own nutrition coach just because I want to have the accountability of it. And sometimes it's nice to have that person from the outside that comes in and looks at things. And sometimes, we as human beings, we just need someone there to be like, no, like, get it together, you can
Right.
do this. We like to have that like accountability there, but just purchasing something and opening your wallet and saying I'm going to invest in myself and getting a coach or a mentor to help me is not enough. You still have to show up. And the people that make a decision, I had this married couple. They're from the Amish. Actually, they came and worked with. I worked with some Amish people too, and they came and worked with me, and both of them, husband and wife, are having phenomenal results. And one of the last conversations that I had with her, which was just last week, she's like, I just decided that I can't afford not to do this. And I was like, I got goosebumps. I was like, I'm gonna cry, because the reality is many people are under the assumption or the belief that they can't afford to do it. But the reality is you can't afford not to, because if you don't feel good, you're not going to show up for your partner, you're not going to show up for your kids, you're not going to show up for your work or your business, because you're literally just making it through and you want to be thriving. So if you want to excel in every area of your life, you're going to want to make this a priority, and you're going to get to that place where you're going to say, I can't afford not to take care of myself.
Yeah, I love that so much. And getting people to that point is that has to be such a rewarding feeling when, you know, you hear a client say that. Then you know you're doing your job and they're receiving and actually making the changes, and they want to make those changes.
Yeah.
And so what you're speaking to, and this is one of the last things I want to ask you, is, you know, you don't just help people with nutrition and the physical, but you're really helping people with mental, emotional, and spiritual too. And that, I think, is maybe even a larger part, because
Yes.
I think sometimes, you know, we kind of get in our own heads and we maybe make excuses or just like limiting beliefs, if you will, of things like why I can't make a change or why I can't achieve a certain X result. So what do you commonly see in terms of like the mental blockages or, you know, emotional or spiritual? Because I mean, Undiet You, that's about mostly mindset, I would imagine, right? Like that's mostly mindset.
Yeah.
And of course the physical component comes in as well, but how do you navigate helping someone with their mental and emotional, you know, challenges?
Oh man, that's my favorite part. When I start working with, let's say, a new client, and one of the first things that I tell them is I say, listen, learning and knowing and understanding how to fuel and nourish your body in order to feel good is very important. So is your weight loss goal. We're never going to negate the fact that that's your goal. But I said we don't stop there, because what has to happen is we have to do healing in here. We have to do healing in the heart. We have to do healing spiritually, mentally, emotionally. And until we do that, your body's not going to heal in the way that you want to. It's not going to respond in the way that you want to. And I'll give you a perfect example. I had a gal, she's still a client of mine. It's one of the most beautiful stories ever. And when she started working with me, she had been round and round with doctors for 20 years and wasn't getting anywhere. She found me on my TikTok. She read my book, and she's like, I have to work with this girl. So when what the second conversation that we had, she's talking about things that are going on in her life. And I said, what are you willing to put up with? What kind of boundaries do you need to put in place, and what do you want? And that was the first conversation that made her go, oh, I am my own responsibility. I can no longer blame the people that are in my life for what is right or wrong in my life. I need to take full responsibility for what is. And so that transpired into her really looking at herself in the form of love and healing and grace. And what that did is her spouse ended up coming forward with things that were very, very difficult. And I'm going to cry about this because it completely changed their marriage. And she just told me yesterday, she said, he wants to thank you. Because if it wasn't for her going through the transformation in the spiritual, mental, and emotional transformation, and getting her voice back and saying, hey, like this is so much more than just my physical body, he would not have seen that. And he was in a place then to no longer blame her for what he thought was her fault. He took responsibility for his own, and she took responsibility for her own, and it allowed them to come together in work on the things that they need to heal from in their relationship. And that is true transformation, because you start getting your voice back. It's always about having your voice.
Oh, that's perfect. I love that so much. That's an incredible story. And I think that's a good place to wrap up and end on. That is amazing. And I hope people are hearing this message. You have such a beautiful voice, and, you know, you're helping so many people. And because you've gone through, you know, what feels like everything. I mean, it seems like you've gone through so much personal experience, and you can really help people from that level of compassion and just, you know, authenticity, because you've been there and you really understand what a lot of people are going through, and you can really help them on virtually every level, the physical and the mental and emotional first and foremost. And you're doing a lot of good in this world. And I just want you to lay out where people can find you and learn more about you and how they can work with you.
Absolutely. So my Instagram is Lizzie Ens _wellness. My email is lizzie@undiet.com. If you're a TikToker, you can find me at Lizzie H _wellness. And any of those places you can find links to get connected with me. My website is www.undietu.com. There's a lot of information there, and I do consultations. So for anybody that's interested in pursuing working with me, you can book a consultation with me, and I love to chat with you.
Perfect. Lizzie, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much.